Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. As a really quick introduction, my name is Taiba Abbas and I am the founder of Ala Books and Authors. And I'm really happy to be here today on this wonderful platform, and that too in conversation with one of Ala's authors, Nwa Rizvi. So clearly this is a very special session for me. Nwa and I will be talking about her debut book, Drapes and Other Stories, which is going to be available very soon. We will be announcing the release date in May, inshallah. So Nwa, welcome.
Yes,
It's
thank you, Taiba.
great to have you here. Really great to see you across the screen. So I will begin by introducing you to our audience, along with a brief glimpse into your book. Okay. So Nwa Rizvi is an artist, a writer, and a translator. Her short stories have been featured in the Aleph Review, the Equator Line magazine, and most recently in the anthology The Banyan and Her Roots. Nwa is a graduate of the Beacon House National University, BNU, and a certified teacher trainer from the University of Texas, Austin. She currently teaches English literature at the Lahore College of Arts and Sciences, LACAS. She has also been a research and teaching assistant at the Lahore University of Management Sciences, LUMS. Her debut book, Drapes and Other Stories, is a collection of stories drawn across the city of Lahore, the homes and the roadsides, encircling the old and the new, uncovering a place where desire, danger, and unspeakable truths come undone. In the decrepit brick alleys of the old walled city, there is a young man anguished over an infatuation beyond his reach, while a pair of red curtains beckon to him from a balcony in the neon-lit district. An impoverished driver negotiates the price of his soul as he chauffeurs his employer's son through the leafy streets of DHA to park in dark corners and keep watch. A creative writing student navigates the dissembling halls of a liberal arts university where validation comes in the guise of rejection and betrayal. In the closed, thronging community of Chungi Amar Sidhu, a butcher resorts to the one method he knows best to redeem the sin in his flesh. Reckoning stalks the dusty recesses of a family home in Model Town, where a long-buried secret seeks its final rest. In all 12 stories, Drapes offers a sensual, unsettling passageway into the city, turning it inside out. This is Lahore as rarely shown before. So, Nwa, I want to begin with the title, Drapes, because those words have a lot of veiling and unveiling inside them. So I want you to unpack that and just take us behind your book to origins and beginnings.
Okay, so it started out as like this compilation of ideas and thoughts and stories that I was getting from newspaper articles. And I'm not talking about the mainstream news that's shown on television. I'm talking about physical newspapers like Jung and Express, and they used to be delivered at home, and I used to go through all the pages and pick up all these stories of small towns, villages, people, places that weren't really shown on TV, but they were like these marvelous and unimaginable, horrific even incidents that took place. So I already had those stories in mind, and obviously you converse with so many people on a daily basis, you have those stories as well. So you can see that I had a vault of stories, but I didn't have a setting to place them in till I started traveling from where I live, which is Askari 11, an upper class society in Lahore, and going to BNU, which is one of the more privileged schools in Lahore. And so I was going from two places, very particular, and in between them, the 45 minutes that I spent in traffic, finding shortcuts, finding different routes, I would end up going through like villages, towns, smaller places I've never been to. And those 45 minutes would be full of different images, different people, different professionals that I really haven't been exposed to before. So in my head, it just kind of clicked. I ended up putting the stories in particular places and images that really attracted me. Because even this story that you're talking about, Red Drapes, the first one in my collection, the one that
It's
the
the
collection
first.
is named after, yeah. That started out from an image because I was
Mm,
just taking very random images one day in the Shahi Mohalla, and I was actually taking a picture of something else. But later on, when I went home, I noticed that if where there are tens and twenties of very boring, drab, standard balconies and windows, you had this one balcony that had really beautiful red drapes on it, enclosed. That image just it didn't stick with me. It just started haunting me till I decided to write a whole story based on it. So that's how all the
mhm,
short stories ended up coming together.
mhm. I just love the way you were talking about place and location and geography, because and this is something I know for a fact, Lahore, the city, it features as a protagonist
Hmm.
in your stories. I mean, like you write about the periphery and the
Hmm.
center, the footpaths and the homes, the streets and the rooms. It's like your emotional canvas or your emotional landscape coincides with the physical geography. So could you talk a bit about that?
Well, it's so you've got that cliche where people say that you need to come to Lahore in order to see the lights and the food and the people and the hospitality, etc., etc.
Mm,
And
yeah.
even though that's all absolutely correct, that's true, 100%. There's a strange juxtaposition that also exists where you can be sitting in a restaurant eating food, and across the footpath, you'll have a display of beggars just waiting for you to get done with change, where you leave with your change and they ask they ask you to buy something or they beg for it.
Mm,
Similarly, you go to these massive malls that have recently sprung up, and you'd be shopping completely oblivious to an outside world, and from the windows of that particular mall you'd be able to see one kachi abadi or another, some squatter settlement, a completely different class. And what's more interesting about the entire setting is that more people than not are actually completely uh, unobserving of it. They don't see it. It's like it just kind of blurs in their vision. So that kind of juxtaposition, if you tune into it all
mm,
over Lahore, it's really
mm,
interesting. And even in my short stories,
mm,
once you read them and you
mm,
figure out their entire trajectory, you'll notice that they
mm,
start from the more lower class, the families with lower income,
mm,
and their
mm,
problems are portrayed to be much more real. Like, for example, you've got
mm,
violence, you've got starvation, you've got betrayal, you've got mob violence as well. So you've got all these issues over there that are more real, more physical, more pressing. And slowly, as
mm,
you go forward towards the end of the collection, not only does the class aspect of it change and you
mm,
enter more upper middle class and the middle class, you also see that the
mm,
problems go from being very literal and physical and concrete to being very abstract and emotional and philosophical,
yeah.
because that's the
Yeah.
end that I believe I and people around me relate to more,
Mm,
even though I'm somebody
mm,
who's also visualized the prior the beginning of my collection as well.
mm, mm.
And
Yeah.
going back to what you were saying about Lahore, that you've got that mix in the city, so that really helps.
Mm, mm. At this point, I just want to go back to your book description.
Yeah.
So these are stories of instinct and unrest, an indictment and redemption that is at once brutal and bloodied as it is mournful and accepting. There are two stories in your present collection. I think Life in Fog and
Hmm.
Death Wish.
Yeah.
And these two stories have already been published in anthologies, right? In Pakistan and India, in the
Yeah.
Aleph Review and the Equator Line magazine. So I was wondering, do you see these stories as representative of your larger work? I mean, in terms of essence and theme?
Well, the theme varies story to story. Obviously, you've got like an umbrella theme, which is general suffering and conflict of just ordinary people. So
Mm,
thematically, it remains more or less the same, even though the spectrum on which it's based changes. What remains similar is definitely the essence, because most of my characters, like in Death Wish and Life in Fog, they're just primarily flawed. They're not
mm,
positive protagonists or very negative antagonists. They're just people who have problems, people who have conflicts, and people who are trying to figure out their place in society and kind of strike that balance between what is right, what they should do, what they are expected to do, and what they want to do, and what is wrong, and what they're forbidden from doing. So you've got that kind of entire dialogue in the short stories where the characters are just exploring themselves, their desires, their ambitions, their aims, and trying to figure out where they stand on this broader societal platform, what they contribute to it, what they take from it, what they give to it. So that essence remains the same. So you'll even in Death Wish, which is about this, which is inspired by this incident that took place in Larkana, where there was this case of HIV positive patients, and they seemed to be stemming from this one clinic that had been accidentally injecting people with needles. So that case really stuck with me, and I read about it in the newspaper. And then I had other characters in mind, other incidents that I ended up kind of synthesizing together and coming up with this one character who really makes you wonder if he is bad or if he is desperate or if he is so insignificant that he is incapable of doing anything at all about an incident that he is actively a part of. So that kind of essence definitely remains the same throughout my short stories.
So you're a translator, right? And you have translated many works of Urdu into English. In fact, your mother, Taiba Abbas, is an eminent Urdu writer. And in fact, her short story titled Khudro, I got it right, Khudro, right? So it was translated into English, retitled as The Talking Tree by you. And it was published last year.
Yes, right? 2019 actually.
In 2019, right? So I'm curious to know what translation means for you. Because, Pakistani literature in English, and to be honest with you, not just Pakistani literature, I would say any literature written in and from the global South, finds itself at a linguistic crossroads. Because when you're moving between languages, I mean, from your supposedly native language to a foreign language, there's this question of the authentic self. Where does the authentic self lie between all those linguistic spaces? So since you have taken an Urdu story, your mother's story, you've taken an Urdu story from its Urdu context, and you have shifted it, mobilized it to another language, to another identity. I'm curious to know what happens in that process, because as I say, you lose things in translation, lost in translation. I don't really agree with that, but I really want to know how you perceive it. So what happens?
Well, I think it's a bit of a two-way street where you lose things in translation sometimes, but you also gain a lot in translation as well. So my mother was writing long before I was born, and as a teenager, I remember she wanted me to read her work. She wanted me to read her poetry and her short stories, and I never could because they were so personal and they were so intensely emotional. I was always terrified of reading Urdu because things were on a completely different emotional level there. And I was much more comfortable with English because I felt like it was much more formal, much more objective, a little distant, a little colder than Urdu. And even listening to songs, like if you listen to an English song and it's about love, you'd still be fine listening to it. But if an Urdu song comes up and somebody starts thinking about muhabbat, it just suddenly makes you feel very uncomfortable and very awkward because it's such a heavy word.
Or you just fall in love instantly.
Yes, you just fall in love instantly. But the emotional palette is so much more dense than in English, right? So at the beginning, I wasn't going to translate anything at all. I was going to stay as far away from Urdu as possible till I started writing in English. And my mother used to recheck my short stories, just edit them, see if I'm getting it right or wrong. And she would always say that, what is wrong with you? Why do you have to be so cold? Do you have no heart inside of you? Why are you so objective? Because the one glaring difference was that I wrote in third person and she writes in first person. And
Okay.
her short stories, among many other authors that I read in Urdu now, they're more of a stream of consciousness based kind of plot that comes primarily from experiences and feelings and thoughts and emotions, very particular to the person writing them. And as far as the structure goes as well, my mother makes heavy use of the ellipses, and because she's writing in thoughts, obviously. So when I started translating all of that, first of all, I had like a translation problem where I couldn't figure out the exact words, the correct words to use to capture that kind of abstract element, that absurdity, that personal note she was writing on, till I got a hang of it with practice. But even afterwards, so that's the lost in translation part. And the gain in translation part is the fact that after I started reading Urdu literature, I ended up unlocking a bit of myself, my Urdu self, as I call it, where even I am emotional and I'm personal and I like to talk about really heavy feelings. And when I started combining that with English and what I knew about English and what I knew about short story writing, it ended up making it a really interesting mix because I was thinking in Urdu, writing in English, and I could finally tap into that kind of niche that I was looking for. Because it's not only my mother, but my grandmother and my grandfather were also poets, and they were coming from the time of partition. So there was a lot of violence and a lot of loss, a lot of suffering, a lot of trauma in their works. Um, and even in the case of my mother, because she was a generation right after the partition, she had a lot of feelings of displacement, of poverty, of being lost, of being completely unsure whether you're going to get bombed at night or not. And you've got little incidents where they're hiding under tables and they're waiting for some kind of bomb drill to go on, or my grandmother's stories of how she was trained to jump into wells when they were attacked in order to, because if they said that women should save their honor and commit suicide instead of get captured and raped. So that kind of dialogue that goes into their works, it makes them so much more potent. I really liked adopting that, and because I am a product of that as well, after all, that side of me that I've been kind of ignoring, because I'm so colonized in a way. I've come from O-level English, A-level English. I've gone to an English university, so everything I've done is so that kind of synthesis between both the languages, it's brought with it like a synthesis of emotions, of experiences, of past traumas as well, which I'm having a lot of fun actually exploring and finding out about.
Yeah. So are you saying that it's possible to reconcile the two, or is one partitioned when one is writing in separate languages?
Well, that's a little complex, and I'm still trying to figure it out because it is definitely very complicated. Because when I'm writing from a completely different perspective, and when I'm translating, I kind of have to leave that bit of myself and just focus on translating, because like I said, it's so hard to reconcile the emotions in Urdu literature. You end up instinctually thinking that, okay, that's not right. And when you think that that's not right, you have a hard time translating it or denying that part, right? So you end up having to look at it as an outsider, because even though I live in the same space, I occupy the same space, I haven't really had the same connection, the link with Urdu literature. So I realized when I started translating, so even my mother's short story, it's about this woman who has been asked to keep her tongue in check. So you've got different instances where she's being scolded by her mother, her husband, her in-laws.
This is the talking tree.
Yeah, this is the talking tree, yeah. And there comes a point where she becomes so sick of the fact that nobody wants to listen to her opinions that she cuts her tongue out and she hides it or buries it in the garden. And ironically, what happens is that because her tongue is uncontrollable, it's feral, a tree ends up growing in its stead, and the leaves of the tree are her tongue, and the tree continuously speaks, even though the woman herself has gone mute.
And we won't give the end away.
But
I want to know, but okay, that's for afterwards.
So so the very act of reading it was so disturbing that I ended up
mm,
thinking that, okay, if I take this to one of my writing workshops, people will be very disturbed and they're going to tell me that it's too abstract and it's too emotional and I
mm,
need to censor it and I need to change it and I need to make it nicer and I need to have a resolution and a conflict and etc etc. And
mm,
everything about that short story was wrong in terms of what I had learned. So I had to
mm,
actually leave myself behind and look at it from a completely outsider's perspective and take it for what
mm,
it was, because it was well received in the Urdu society, in the Urdu speaking, the Urdu laureates
mm.
in Pakistan. They really liked it. So
Yeah.
whenever I translate, I do have to have that division there where I'm translating as an outsider, but when
Mm,
I'm writing as myself.
mm, mm. Now, I'm glad you brought up that point about leaving yourself behind, because what I find fascinating is that most of your stories are written with a male voice. I mean, I won't say a male gaze, but they're written from a male perspective. So there's the story of a driver,
Mm.
a butcher, a police officer, then there's a story of the boy living in the old walled city,
Yeah.
and many more. So, as a writer, I won't say as a girl, but as a writer, how do you disengage from your female experience and step into another one?
Okay, so there's actually two things that are happening over here. The first thing that's happening is that I was completely unaware of this. I was completely unaware of the fact that I'm writing from a
Mm,
male perspective till I started writing a lot of short stories. And in retrospect, I noticed that, oh my, all of these are from a male perspective. What is wrong with me? Why am I not writing from a female's perspective? And when I
mm,
thought about it, it occurred to me that because I want to capture scenes and settings and stories that aren't really available to me as a girl, I end up even imagining myself as a man when I'm looking at them in my head. So when I've got
mm,
when I've got a landscape, I've looked at it, I've come home. So at night or whenever I'm writing, I'm going to reimagine that landscape and I'm going to be in it. My
mm,
conditioning is so severe that even in my head, I'll know that I won't be able to go to that place as a woman. So I have to be
mm,
a man, and instinctively, I end up becoming a man, even in my head. And I view those places at
mm,
night, in times when I can't, in danger, on a
mm,
bicycle, on a motorcycle, on a donkey cart. So whatever kind of situation I'm trying to encapsulate, my perspective ends up taking that of a man's, because primarily, in Pakistani society, that is a man's worldview. But on the
mm,
other hand, it's not only just about the male perspective. I mean, my short stories aren't limited to that conventional male and female. Most of my male
mm,
characters also have very feminine tendencies or very feminine behavior
mm,
patterns where they are caring and nurturing and loving and passionate. And they are conflicted because these feelings don't really align with the norm, with the standardized behavior for a man. And on the other hand,
yeah.
you've got my female characters who
Mm,
actually show a lot of masculine attributes like anger and violence and the
mm,
tendency to leave, which is generally considered to be very male. So it's an
mm.
interesting mix of both.
Yeah. But I was wondering, do you think there's the danger of falling into black and white, like strict demarcations of what's male and what's female?
Not really. Well, you have to understand what's considered male and female for you to try and break that pattern. Because where I do have these characters who are not particularly male and female, they are set up
Mm,
against a background that is very
mm,
conventional, that's very normal, that's very standardized. And
mm,
obviously, I didn't make that setting up. I'm just literally picking it up from what I see and putting it on paper. It's just the
mm,
personalized bonds that I have within that story that are changeable or adaptable to whatever I want them to be. So, yes, obviously, it is black and white, but I need to have that black and white in order for me to also explore the grayness in the middle, because
mm.
that's something
And
that,
then you create it on your own.
and
Mm,
then I create on my own, I question it. So there's no definite
mm,
answer in at the beginning of my short story. A lot of times when I start writing, I don't have a
mm,
clear end in mind. A lot of times my characters would just frankly tell me themselves that, hey,
mm,
not going to get better. This is us. So, stop the short story now, please. There's not going to be
Yeah.
arc for us. So, and I can feel it. I know that I'll be forcing them if I change them or make some kind of moral statement at the end of a short story. So I let it be. So my entire short stories are kind of like just a bunch of explorations, a bunch of what ifs, a bunch of what nots. In fact, the short story Life in Fog, it up this hope that two people have of escaping and running away, but the point is that they never do, which is why the fog is so important. So that kind of essence is constant throughout my short stories.
Fascinating. So tell me, how did you go about compiling your stories for this collection? Like, did you leave out a lot?
Yeah.
Was it or was it like just an organic process? So were you working towards a unified thematic concern?
Well, at the beginning, I just had one aim in mind. I read this. I attended this author's workshop once. I forgot whose, and he made it a point to say that before you start dreaming about anything in terms of writing, the first thing you need to do is have at least 75,000 words written. Whether they're good or bad is not a question, but you need a manuscript to build anything off on. You can't go around publishing houses asking them to give you a deal if you don't have a manuscript. So that needs to be your first aim. And I was actually writing, and still I'm writing a longer piece. I'm writing a novel. And these short stories, actually little thoughts in my head that were interfering with my novel. So I ended up turning them into stories just to get them out of my system, so that I would try to force in my major plot or my other characters. And you must remember this as well, that it came up so suddenly where we were discussing publishing. And
over a plate of fries.
Yes, over a plate of fries. And you were surprised to find out that I actually have written 75,000 to 80,000 words, and we decided to build on that. And the editing process itself has been a lot of fun, because it's been very humbling, I guess, because you end up writing something and you treat it like your child, you treat it like you made it. And then when your editor comes in and they want to, change it, adapt it for the better, tailor it perfectly, obviously because you're coming in with like, like as a third person, as an outsider, you become very possessive. But there was a lot of editing where we had to get rid of some of my short stories that were more supernatural, that were more fantastical, that were more diverging from the socio-political aspect we were working towards. And I remember, you must remember too, that there were a lot of tears and anger at that point.
And a lot of smiles.
And a lot of, ultimately, yes, because I have immense respect for editors now, where I do think that you need to let it go and allow them to work with whatever you've written, because it's for the betterment after all.
And the clock is telling me we need to wrap up soon. So I will just conclude the session with one quick question.
Yeah.
So I personally believe, not as a publisher, as a writer, that we all have a way of creating our own writing process. We have our own methods, but still it's always helpful to offer some pieces of advice, suggestions for debut authors. So what would you like to share?
Well, because I'm teaching already and I talk to my students a lot about this, one piece of advice I give everybody is that never get rid of things that you've written, because I know that as a teenager or a young adult, or even as a passionate adult, you really end up being so passionate sometimes, or disappointed, that you end up tearing things up, or you end up deleting them. You end up deleting whole folders. Like I remember once I wrote a lot. I wrote 40 pages of something, and I got so tired and full of angst that I ended up deleting the entire folder, that I regret now, because you can always go back to all of your half-baked, your drafts. You can always go back to your ideas and just pick up from them and rework them and use them, especially if you're going to them after a lot of time. There's going to be a new perspective, there's going to be a newer angle. So my advice to anybody would be to just keep writing and just keep saving everything, even if it reads terribly, even if you think it's not worth being saved, just save it, because if it came out of your head, then there is a very good chance that there's something unique about it that you might not be able to see now, but you can always come back to it and see it then and work with it. Which is even like true for my short stories, because a lot of my short stories are based on notes that I wrote down in either my notebooks or my history geography books. I remember some of my short stories that have to do with partition. I would make notes at the top of my history book and just write down thoughts and feelings. And if I'm looking at a picture of a man, I would just attach a story to that person and write it down. And now when I revisit all those books and notebooks, I do get a lot of ideas.
Yeah. Wow, that's a wonderful note to end on. And that's like really helpful for me. I'm definitely going to utilize that tip. But thank you, Nwa. It's been great. And everyone who tuned in, thank you for watching. And I really hope you enjoyed the session, because I most certainly did. I mean, it's been really insightful for me, asking you questions I never really got to ask you before. That's shameful. But
no, this has been really
I am all geared up for your book launch.
Yes.
Thank you. And beyond this book, I look forward to much more. So keep writing, and I can't wait to read what you write next.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nwa. Bye.
Okay,
Take care.
Bye.